Hello, and welcome to a new series here in City Skylines 2. Along the dramatic coast of the Pacific Ocean, here in the Pacific Northwest of America, a new county has been formed. With hills, mountains, complex waterways, and an abundance of gorgeous greenery, this new region has been named Veridian County. Unlike cities in the east like New York and Chicago, where growth was more concentrated around a single major city, Veridian County's development is going to be more dispersed among a number of major points in the region, each of which will use the area's many natural harbors and rivers to fuel their growth. These different cities will occasionally compete for county resources, but they'll all share the same coastal industries of shipbuilding, logging, fishing, and coastal trade. Each city in Veridian County will work together to build the region into one of the best places to live in the world. In today's episode, I want to talk you through the foundations of Veridian County, how I selected a map, how I planned the region, and the starts of the county's largest city of Lemuria. Welcome to Veridian County. Now, before we get to any building whatsoever, let's take a look at my overall process for planning an entire map at once, starting with map selection. The biggest decision that any aspiring city builder can make is selecting the right location for their city, picking the right map. This is a decision that you can only make once. You can do a lot of terraforming, but the foundations of a map will always be there, so you want to pick well. Before you even begin the search process for a map, it's important to think about what you might be looking for in a potential map. Having played games like City Skylines 2 in the past, I know that I want to reference my favorite cities that I have the most experience with of Hong Kong, Seattle, and New York, so I try to pick geography similar to all three of these. Often what I'll be looking for are large hills and mountains nearby to set the scene and give a gorgeous backdrop to the city. Varied terrain heights, so my city's not all flat, and to give me a bit of a challenge while building, and honestly just to make the visuals of the game a little bit more interesting. Proximity to the ocean or a large body of water, again for visual interest, but also because in these cities that I'm inspired by, maritime trade is a huge part of their industries and their history. I'm also partial to larger bodies of water like oceans rather than just rivers because it lets you play around a bit more with shipping routes, ports, and piers, and it creates a natural boundary for growth in your city, rather than letting it sprawl on and on forever. I look for lots of greenery, trees, and vegetation, or at least the ability to add these realistically, because one of the things that I admire most about places like Seattle and Hong Kong is how close they are to gorgeous nature both within the city and outside of it. I look for an abundance of buildable areas with lots of variety across them. This means maps that aren't just islands, so that I know that I won't be running out of space as they grow, but unique enough that I know that I'll be creating loads of unique little bubbles, rather than copying the same strategies for population growth over and over again. And most importantly, excitement for me, because I need to be excited for the city that I'm about to spend hours of my life building. This doesn't just mean that I want to build, because I always do, but it also means that I can create lore and give purpose to my cities, like I'm going to be doing for the city of Lemuria today. Many people have different preferences for a map. If you're looking to the Midwest USA, you might want to be looking for flatter cities that are great for farming and might not have as much easy access to a body of water. If you're looking somewhere to the north, you might want to look for a city map that looks good when it's snowy in the wintertime. If you're looking for desert cities, kind of like Phoenix, you might want a city that looks nice when you recolor the terrain to sand. Or if you're just looking for an easy map to build and sprawl on endlessly, because we know that City Skylines 2 doesn't handle terrain very easily, you might just want some pretty flat land, although you might want to be constricted to an island so that you don't sprawl just forever, like some cities like Houston do. But personally, I really enjoy hilly, more diverse terrain for all the interest that they will bring to my cities. In my first city, Commerce County, I picked a vanilla map because it's all we had at the time. Let's take a look at that map with nothing on it. This was the Great Highlands map, which to an extent met the criteria that I wanted. First, it has the large hills and mountains that I want. They may not be the most pretty and they've got these kind of odd plateaus at the top, but they're interesting at least because they gave me varied terrain heights. This is definitely not a flat map. And I can build down by the water, up on the mountain plateau, and anywhere in between. It's right by the ocean, and though there are these huge mountains blocking the way, and you'll see in a moment this was actually a challenge for me, thankfully there were quite nice rivers for me to work with throughout my gameplay. It doesn't actually have a ton of vegetation, but you could totally envision forests like this all throughout these lowlands, and even creeping up the mountains, as you see in a few locations on this map, so I knew that I could totally add forests wherever I wanted to. There's tons and tons of buildable area even on top of the mountains, which I didn't expect. I've already played through this map, so I can tell you that it took me months and months of playing almost every single day to fill this map up, and there's still, to this day, a bunch of empty spaces in the map that I could build more on. That said, they weren't actually super unique sometimes. A lot of them were basically the same condition. Bluffs with distant mountains somewhat by the river on these almost identical stretches of map between the two hills. And lastly, for my criteria, yes, I was excited. The game had just released when I started on this map, and frankly, I would not pick this map again. Just coming back to it now after having seen our other options, it is so ugly. The way this map is set up doesn't really lend itself to any sort of lore or history. It's so disconnected from the ocean by these mountains that you wouldn't really expect it to be a huge maritime trading industry, but it's also not got natural forests for logging industries or the geography for a lot of other industries. You can definitely come up with lore, but it can be harder for a map like this. If you look back at my 6 main criteria, you can see that a lot of the vanilla maps actually miss out on them. Whether it's that there's no hills or mountains, that there's not enough variation in the terrain heights, it's not by the ocean or by the water, there's not a lot of potential for vegetation, or there's just not a lot of unique areas, I just didn't really get excited about very many of these maps, and I couldn't really see the lore that would come out of them. Since those vanilla maps lack the interest that I'm looking for, we can turn to mods and community maps to find what I'm looking for. There are a lot of maps, and frankly, I ended up looking through 100 different maps just to see what I wanted. This meant Googling, watching videos for the best maps, asking people in the community for recommendations, and clicking through tons and tons of maps through Skive, which, as you can see on screen right now, is my preferred way to interact with content on PDX mods. A lot of maps got ruled out pretty immediately, like this one for example. I clicked on randomly European Riverside. If I look at this map, it doesn't really meet any of my criteria. There's no hills, varied terrain, it's not really close to any water, there's not much unique buildable area, there's a little bit of vegetation, but it doesn't really seem unique, and I'm just not excited about it. But there were a few really good contenders that I thought had cool, unique terrain that I hadn't seen before, and might have actually fit my criteria. So I looked through a whole bunch of these maps, and whenever I found one that I was interested in, I added it to my playset and launched the game to check them out. Here in game, we can see my top 3 maps that I thought were promising: Cape of Merchant, Kexford, and Leisure Valkyria. Leisure Valkyria is a version of the popular Valkyria map that has a more realistic start. It just reduces the number of highways, reduces the number of trains, and shrinks the highways down to just 2-way, 1-lane each direction highways. Let's take a look at these. Looking at the Cape of Merchants map, I can tell that we'll be starting off pretty well. This isn't a super crazy highway, this is a pretty decent little interchange over here. It's very pretty, and there's actually a good amount of terrain all around here. But if I look at my actual playable area, that's where it starts to go downhill. My playable area has kind of these 2 big bays in it, and then a lot of very flat terrain with just a few hills poking through. Most of the actual interesting terrain is outside of the playable area, and as a result it ends up looking barren, without any sort of trees or any level of detail whatsoever. So while this map looks pretty good from up above besides the glitchy water texture, once I actually thought about how I would be playing and interacting with it, it's not very unique and I just wasn't very excited about it. Here we have the Valkyria map, which is actually one of my favorites. There's nothing really outside the playable area besides ocean, so you don't really get any low poly terrain textures, and the terrain within the map is amazing. There's so much height variation, there's a lot of hills and mountains, a lot of varied terrain heights, and tons of just unique areas to build in, whether it's this area facing the cove, small islands, little valleys between the mountains, some mountaintop areas, or bays that are just feeding out into the ocean. I love this map, and it got me really excited, but I've already done personal single-player worlds on this map, so I didn't really think that it was the right fit for this new Northwest County map. Although it would have been a really fun map too, so I'd highly recommend it if any of you are looking for anything to start on. Leisure map as well, as you can see, uses a lot lower density highways, so you can just branch off, upgrade the highways yourself, and not have to worry about having overbuilt infrastructure to start off with. But because I'd already played on this Valkyria map and I didn't find any of the others on Skive or that I'd looked at quite as interesting, I, at the end of the day, ended up coming back to Kexford. I've actually done a small series on this map in the past where I tried to start historically. I started out coming from this little area and built out just this little area over here, kind of nestled in the back corner of the playable area. I tried to start historically, but the lack of mods at the time and my lack of knowledge about historic growth patterns just didn't lend that historic start concept to a successful series. So I thought I'd come back around and do this map justice. As you can tell, Kexford really meets a lot of my criteria. There are great hills and mountains, there's a lot of varied terrain heights throughout the map, it's right by the sprawling Pacific Ocean, there's a good amount of vegetation already on the map, and there's great potential to fill this entire area with forests if I wanted to. There's a lot of unique buildable areas, whether along the coast, between mountains, on islands, on peninsulas, these little jut-out bits into the water, little bays, all sorts of things. Tons of unique areas, so I got really excited and I could immediately start thinking about some lore and settlers and ways to interact with this land. Now that I had the Kexford map selected, let's look into how to begin planning for a city by looking at early visions for the city's future. This is a process that's done in-game, and the first step of this process was already done during the map selection phase. Because of my criteria, I know that there are loads of different locations for downtown hubs in this area. Specifically, when I look at this map, I notice this area up here, this area down here, and this area right along the water as great locations for downtowns. They've got a really good connection potential to the rest of the region, they've got great access to water and surrounding terrain, and they've just got the general aesthetic that I'm looking for. But one area really calls to mind, and that's this area, which is where I decided to set up Lemuria, the city's biggest city. Now that's not to say that I don't want to build in these other great areas for downtowns, I definitely do, but we'll get to that. They'll be more of a separate side cities that are pretty big in their own right, but not quite as big as the flagship city of Lemuria here in Veridian County. Now that I know that I want downtown generally in this area, I can start to think of the different components that go into a downtown area. I can see a couple options for this region. I could see skyscrapers right around this tip with the ferry harbor and piers and a little bit of industry up in this area. Or I could turn this little corner into a marina over here, build out some land for skyscrapers all along the water over here, and then have the historic area and ferry down here, which is what, as you can see, I've done. If I do that, that means my skyscrapers are bordering this water, and the industrial area would then push into this bay over here. Looking at this terrain, I think I could do some pretty fascinating things with this area if it was industrial, so I lean towards this plan at first. Now again, knowing that my downtown is in this corner of the map, I can begin to think about how the rest of the map fits into this. If this is my main city, then I know that I'll want these other cool locations that I pointed out earlier to be from more sister cities. I also know that I'll want an airport, so I think that might be able to go on this island over here. I also want a university, which I think would be super cool if it surrounded the two sides of the ship canal that came preloaded with the map right over here. Now, if I have my development kind of in the C shape around the central bay with the airport in there, that leaves the rest of these areas to think about. And I think I can do some farms, some national parks, and some small towns in these areas, and we can keep thinking about interesting features to add later. With these early visions developed, it's time to develop concepts for various districts all around the map. First things first, I need to take a screenshot of my blank map with the border visible. Now it's a little bit hard to see, especially with YouTube compression right now, but I've installed the compass map so that I can reset my boundary to north and get a consistent angle for my picture no matter when I take it, whether the border is visible and kind of hard to see or not. To write down my ideas, I ended up opening a new Google Drawing to work on, though you could do this through Paint or by drawing on paper if you wanted to. I just found this the easiest and the most fun. Now the first thing that I want to do is to work on a vision map. The vision map basically goes something like this. I take a bunch of text boxes and I write down my ideas all over it, and I just plop down a bunch of text boxes all over the map until it fills up fully. Now I've already done this off camera, and what that ends up looking like is something like this. You can see that I've really got these ideas for my downtown over here that I mentioned. I have that marina, the ferries, the industry area over here, and the airport up there, followed by one of the sister cities over here, as I pointed out, another sister city up there, and a whole bunch of farmland all throughout this area that I hadn't had thoughts for originally. From there, I started to add in extra different points. Like, for example, in the midst of all this farmland, I wanted to have a few coastal villages kind of nearby that sister city. I know I want to have the university over there, so maybe we'll have some row homes, some single family homes further out from there. I want to have some stadiums, some golf, train depots, another historic fishing village, maybe some fancy stuff on this island over here since the airport's right there and my cities are all around it. And maybe sort of a metro town over here where a bunch of transit kind of meets in the center of the whole map. Maybe that would be fun. I'm not going to spoil everything over here because you'll see more of it as we develop this series a little bit more, but planning like this really helps me get an idea for what I want to do with my map. From here, I can begin to think about the different connections that I would need to each of these areas. Of course, the first thing you always have to be thinking about is your highways, because we are in America after all. To figure out the locations for these highways, I took a screenshot of my screenshot with all of these little text notes all over it, and I could see the different locations that I wanted to connect to. Now, the base map already has some highways that are connecting through the areas, so I might not want to change these up too much because that'll be a lot more work, but I do have some ideas for ways that I want to connect things. It kind of makes sense to have some of these highways that run around through the university district, maybe through the industry, through some of these forests, and through the farmland over here. But I probably also want another branch that comes through downtown, another one that runs through the airport, maybe one that runs through the historic fishing village, although I'm not sure if this is necessary. And there has to be a connection that runs right up here to connect these two segments. With a little bit of color coding and more polish on these highway routes, I can figure out generally where I want things to go. I have this green line that runs from this outside connection right into the main orange north to south line that kind of mirrors the vanilla one. This runs from the north through my U district, through the industry over there, through all of these different parts, but I also have my red line that branches off of it and runs through downtown to connect over now to this side. I have my purple line that then runs through the northern part of this island since there's a big forest in the middle of it. And of course I have my blue line that kind of serves as a loop all around the bay and has a bunch of tunnels and bridges to connect up everything in the middle. These concepts generally seem pretty sound, so then I got to numbering the highways, and I've actually gotten a question about this in the past, so I figured it's a good time to explain it. Now of course, now it's time to consult our friend Wikipedia on the interstate highway system. There's a whole section on the numbering system for interstate highways, and you can see here how it's broken down. Besides Alaska, Hawaii, and Puerto Rico, which are off of the mainland, mainland highways are broken up into primary interstates, which have 1 or 2 digits, like I-5, I-90, or 3-digit highways, which are like I-287 and I-405. The primary highways, which are 1 or 2 digits, run east to west and north to south primarily. The east to west highways have even numbers, while the north to south highways have odd numbers. The primary highways basically connect up large sections of the country. For example, Interstate 5 runs all the way down from California up through the Canadian border up in Washington. I-95 runs all the way up from Boston area, I think, down all the way to Florida maybe. I-90 runs from Seattle all the way across the entire country to Boston. I'm not really sure about Interstate 10, but these are really major highways that connect across states, connect major destinations, major cities, and run for a long time. Then, instead of the primary highways, you then have your secondary or auxiliary highways, and these typically have 3 numbers. Auxiliary highways are really shorter highways. While a highway like Interstate 10 connects a bunch of different cities, a 3-digit highway or an auxiliary highway is a lot shorter. Maybe it's just a spur, or a loop, or just a stub that doesn't really go anywhere. There are a bunch of different terms for all of these, but just keeping it simple, the numbering of these is pretty fun in and of itself. It depends on whether the highway connects at just 1 point or connects at 2 points. If it connects at 1 point, then it gets an odd first digit, like the 3 and the 5 here. If it connects at 2 points, then it gets an even number first digit, like 2, 6, or 8. So I loosely used this methodology when I was naming my highways, although it's a little bit imperfect, because my highways run mostly north to south, but they do a fair bit of curving as they make their way around the mountains. So it's not really a perfect system, plus I have this beltway that's not really around my city, but more around the whole terrain, so it's not amazing, but generally speaking, if my highway connected to an outside connection, then I called it a major interstate, because I figured that it would be crossing the whole rest of the country. And if my highway was self-contained within the map, like 401 here, 298 there, and I-180 over there, then it doesn't connect to any outside connections, you can see the limits of it, it's more finite, so it gets a 3-digit number. Of course, I wouldn't be an urbanist if I didn't also think about regional and commuter rail while I'm doing this district concepting. So I really took a similar pathway to the highways here, so I'll keep it a lot briefer, but I took a screenshot of my screenshot, started to think about the different destinations that everything might connect to. I ran a few that were kind of parallel to the highways, but also a few branches off that weren't exactly the same as the highways. Then I color-coded everything and I basically had my routes. A couple of important considerations in here. I have my train hub right here in downtown. I have this metro town which is in the center of the map, and I know that I want to continue to reach my outside connections and all of my major sister cities. So if you look at this map, you can see that that's what this does. This purple line reaches the sister city from my grand central hub downtown. This centralized point connects up a bunch of my lines, while my outside connections 1, 2, 3, and 4 down here are being pretty well covered. There are some gaps in service, but that's completely realistic for regional rail. It's not going to get everywhere, and that's where other forms of transportation will come in at a later date. With all 3 of these maps done, I really have my high-level regional planning all set. But I know that I'm going to be working on the city of Lemuria first, which is this whole downtown area over here. So I knew that I wanted to plan out the transportation for this area too. So I zoomed in a bunch, took another screenshot of my screenshot, and I moved onto the Lemuria City Rail Network. This is a network that has both subway lines and tram lines. The tram lines are these kind of narrower 2-pixel wide ones, while the subway lines are the thicker ones. The dash line is something that I don't want to build initially, but I'm interested in having as future expansion area. So I want to make sure that I'm planning for it as I build any of the highways or infrastructure in this area. As always, everything is trying to come to my grand central downtown, but I know that I also want to be connecting to the central business district, airport, the university, and just connecting out to a lot of these other sprawling areas, especially areas like up here where my regional rail doesn't really cover it that well. So I planned a bunch of routes, some of them that ran around down here closer to my ferries, tram routes that ran across the waterfront, up through the forests, up into the more hilly areas that subways can't reach as easily, more sprawling routes, and this blue route which is the connector between the National Mall, the airport, and the university, because it wasn't really feasible to come up and over here, but it makes sense to do a little bit of a loop to connect lines like the purple line and the light blue line up with each other without having to go all the way down to downtown and back. With our overall planning for the map complete, it's finally time for us to get to building the starts of our city. I want to hop in game and start to think about lore for where I want to start, and I want to start right over here in Old Town. In its earliest years, settlers pulled up to the coastline of this indigenous land, and in this really fantastical world, they worked together with the indigenous community to create society rich with both urban infrastructure and natural beauty. I'm thinking of this area where the city of Lemuria came first to the region because the ships pulled up to the peninsula, the first peninsula of solid land that they could find as they came in from the ocean. The shallow hills of this area began to be built upon, and the city's Old Town was built. Old Town, I'm thinking, is the first neighborhood in the city, or was the first neighborhood in the city, with narrower streets, brick buildings, and architecture that's more reminiscent of cities over on the East Coast. I'm thinking that a lot of the people, or especially in this earlier area, the city will be coming in by ship, so the first thing that I built in this area, besides the roadway that connects up to that highway network that you saw me planning before, is this harbor area. This harbor is unfortunately really modern, but I'm using the historical start mod, so I had access to it really early on. Placing that down right here at the ends of the road, this is kind of the tip of the district, and I'm assuming that they would have carved some sort of cut in here for the water to flow through, so that the ships can make the turn a little bit easier rather than having to jump out and work with this peninsula over here. This peninsula might become some sort of more easy boat accessible area in the future, but I haven't really started to think about this yet because it's a little bit less urban and more disconnected from what's going to be this historic old town. First things first, just looking at the terrain around here, I didn't really think that it made sense to have a highway run through here with everything so narrow. This highway wouldn't really be serving anybody, so I think it makes more sense to have it run right through here. This is already changing up from our maps that we did earlier, but that's totally okay. It's really important when you're planning a city to know that it's not final and everything is still fluid. This is the area that I plan to have my Grand Central in. And I think that'll still work out to have a highway in here, but I'm not going to think about how that highway looks until I get to developing this area. So for now, I've just kept it as a two-way local street that links up to the broader network of the region. What I have done is I've created a really wide street that circles this entire area and will connect up to the highway on both sides. And this is going to really be the main connector of Old Town to the rest of the city, because especially this side is really narrow. So we need to have a wide street that was probably used for everything in the olden day, for the horses, for the deliveries, for the shipments, for people, for major development and everything. This is probably a really major road, so it makes sense that even in the past, it was kept really, really wide. Now that I have this main road in, I want to begin to develop the overall street network. And as I said earlier, I might want this to be made up more with some narrow streets and grids that don't really mesh with each other, because I want it to be a more historic development pattern that wasn't really set in stone and is really driven by just wherever settlers wanted to build on this fresh new land. Okay, I might have gotten a little bit ambitious over here, but I've planned out a lot of the grids of the city now. You can see that I'm using a lot of alleys all throughout here to create the foundations of these blocks, and I'm not really using any roads wider than these just two-way, one-lane roads with sidewalks and street parking. I don't really want anything too wide, and you can see that a lot of the blocks around here are irregular. I've also started to create some piers over here. This is where I really got carried away, because I wanted our first settlers to be living in this kind of older building. Now, I'm not building everything as if it's historic and I'm going to upgrade it. I'm kind of blending the line where I might make some changes as the city grows, but for the most part, this is final. So I wanted to think of this as this older, more historic port that's been reused and turned into some sort of housing project, while over here you still have a little bit of industry. This port has been turned into a custom park, and over here you have a little bit of boat storage. I'm having a lot of fun with creating these custom buildings, and I do think they look pretty good, honestly. What I've done for these is I've used the static ploppables mod with some actual buildings just stuck inside there. I've also used a custom pedestrian road all along the border over here with a key wall to kind of shape the whole terrain of the area. The last two things that I've done while we were away is place down the subway stop, because as you saw in my transit planning, I wanted to have a line that loops around here. And I placed in a park, because what better use for terrain that's so narrow as this than to have a little riverside walkway with some rocks bordering the river, some nice little play areas, and a whole bunch of parking for the district, for the residents that live around here and for the park goers. Now I've started to place a few of the essential city services in this area, like a police station, a firehouse, and a little medical clinic. I think I might change the locations of this later, especially this medical clinic. I just don't think it really fits the historic nature of this area, while the firehouse and the police station kind of really work with the style that I'm expecting us to go with over here. But I'm thinking that before I start to fill out all this area with buildings, I want to develop the rest of the map. So putting down some of these services, we have a small coal power plant over here, water treatment, some wind turbines, and a water tower just to give us some basic services over there. And I have a landfill off this local road over here, which is going to begin to collect waste for us. Now think of the lore, I also want to think about what happens as the city grows, because if I'm building a pretty polished city over here, there's got to be some infrastructure surrounding it. So in addition to the city services, I'm thinking that as the city began to grow, some of the forests of Lemuria were chopped down to make way for sprawling farmland, fueling not just the city of Lemuria, but the other cities in the region. So what I've begun to do up here is to create a whole bunch of farmland, first snaking around this river, but also just drawing out the roads in here in sort of a gridded fashion that uses pretty large shaped grids that are somewhat but not exactly reminiscent of the Jeffersonian grid that we have here in the US, which is really a system of 1 mile by 1 mile squares that bound a lot of farms and bound a lot of rural development. Here I wanted to do something a little bit smaller, but generally get the same idea, where there's squares and pockets that fill up the land. So any future development will have to be taking these squares one by one from these farm owners and buying it up as small towns and oil industries and bigger things grow. I've also started to just place in a couple of little social housing over here just to fuel this population. Eventually I want to get rid of this housing and turn it into a nice town, and expect that some of the suburbs around here will fuel these farms. But since we don't have that development yet, I just placed down some social housing in the interim, and we've got a good amount of households in here, started to get some population growth. Generally speaking, this is going to really help us with our production in the area. You can see we have a huge surplus. This is going to help us with our production, help us with our budget as we grow this downtown, but it's also honestly just going to make the map look really good from overhead, to have farms all throughout the area that we can get rid of at a later date. Now I've filled out all these roads with farms, I put in a bunch of trees, and honestly I think this looks amazing! I used a lot of anarchy for this because I haven't bought these map tiles, but I mostly just used two-way roads, put trees along the borders of it, and built the farms right up to the borders of every single road. So you kind of get these strips of trees along the borders, which are really used for wind protection, broken up by a few forestry industries where I thought there were some forests already existing, and we've got this amazing farming area just up in this corner of the map. I also started to bring this grid down onto this whole parcel of land, just because it can give it some definition. I think pretty soon, just momentarily, I want to fill out this whole area with farming as well. Before I do that, I think it's finally time for me to start adding some buildings into here. I'm pretty happy with how this quadrant up here looks. It looks really nice from up above, and even though we have a whole bunch of lack of labor symbols, building the housing down here will start to fill up that demand for labor over here and really get us a nice balanced ecosystem for the time being. So I'll be right back with you after I plopped in a whole bunch of buildings. And we're back with a totally filled out district. Ta-da! I know. Okay, first things first, what I've done around the ferry, I've created kind of this car waiting area. The idea is that if we have a car-based ferry terminal, a lot of the cars will have to queue up to wait before they get on the ferry. So this is kind of their queuing area. They'll turn into the street, turn into the parking stalls as they wait over here, and then they'll drive right over here and off this road into the ferry so that they can load and depart. I've also created this construction area over here, which I eventually want to use to build the maintenance offices for this harbor. But most importantly, the whole district is filled in. I primarily use northeast assets because I really feel like they're the historic look that I'm looking for, but some of these southwest, North American, and even a few EU buildings just really fit the vibe that I was going for. We've got all of our services in here. We've got our church, we've got the fire station, firehouses, I put 2 down this time, and our police station that we looked at earlier. You can see that I did end up upgrading that medical clinic to a full USA Northeast one because I think this fits the style a whole lot more. Got some parking in the middle of the city over here, plus over here, right next to our elementary school, and our itty bitty little high school over here. And generally, I'm really liking how this district is feeling. It definitely feels kind of low, very historic, mid-rise level. It's got a good amount of trees, but really narrow streets. It's got a whole lot of pedestrians walking around the area and enjoying it, and a lot of space that's reserved for parking that I want to fill in pretty shortly as well. For just being the starts of a city, honestly, I'm pretty happy with this. I do think there's a little bit more work that I want to do, but this episode is going on pretty long now. So for the starts of a city where we have Old Town over here, plus a whole bunch of farms up here, I think that we've done pretty well for ourselves. I hope that you've enjoyed understanding how to plan the starts of a city for us, how to begin creating kind of this old town, how to plan for it, how to plan the infrastructure, the trains, the highways, and what to think about when you're putting ideas into this. I thought about how you're entering the city, kind of the access, the level of capacity that all the roads need to have, think about the farms that you need to back it up, and just the whole map as a whole. I'm really liking how the city is turning out, and I'm looking forward to developing the area further in the next episode. But before we go today, let's do a couple of cinematics. I've never done this before, so I really hope you appreciate it. Let's just see how everything has changed since the start of the map, since the, halfway through the episode when we picked this map, to right now, where we've got a small starts of an old town or a downtown, and a bunch of farming area. Welcome back. Honestly, personally, I think those turned out really well. They were a little bit of a challenge to make, but honestly, it wasn't as hard as I thought it would be, since the City Skylines 2 is a really nice recording interface. Generally speaking, I'm really happy with this episode. I've tried a few different City Skylines series in the past, and I've struggled a little bit to figure out where they should go and how I can keep playing without just recording my hours and hours of troubleshooting and detailing. I'm still going to keep the Fixing Comments County series, even though you haven't seen it for quite a few months at this point, but this series is effectively going to be something that I bring you in for whenever I do something that I think is exciting. Not everything in the city is exciting, but I'll bring you in when there is something. There's going to be a lot of more boring bits, more boring landscaping and detailing that I don't think you're particularly interested in. So only the more unique projects will be covered, like this historic old town or how I plan the city. This new way of handling series might slow down the uploads a little bit more, since I do work a full-time workforce job, and it might mean that this particular series is going to be coming a little bit less frequently, but I'd still like to stick to a weekly or bi-weekly frequency with videos each weekend if I can. I hope you're enjoying this city and the future of it as much as I am. I've spoiled a little bit with the planning, but not as much as I could be. I hope you're looking forward to what's to come, and I'll see you in the next episode. Thank you all for watching. Bye-bye!